Imagine waking up in Beijing in the 1970s. You pull back your curtains expecting to see the city, but instead, you see yellow. The sky is yellow. The air is thick with dust. You can barely see across the street. This isn't fog, it's sand from the Gobi Desert 400 kilometers away, burying your city. Beijing experienced an average of 26 sandstorm days per year. People wore masks just to go outside. Buildings were coated in layers of desert dust. The Gobi Desert was expanding at a rate of 3,600 square kilometers of grassland per year, swallowing farms, villages, and entire ecosystems. By 2000, 29.7% of China's total land area had been desertified. Over 400 million people, climate refugees, were forced to abandon their homes as fertile farmland turned to sand. Crops failed. Wells dried up. The desert was winning. Scientists predicted that if nothing changed, northern China would become uninhabitable within decades. Then China did something unprecedented. 1978. The government launched the Three-North Shelterbelt Program, also called the Great Green Wall, the largest ecological engineering project in human history. The plan: plant billions of trees across 4,480 kilometers of northern China over 72 years to create a living barrier against the advancing deserts. Critics called it impossible. Scientists said trees couldn't survive in such harsh conditions. International experts predicted failure. But according to official Chinese government reports confirmed by NASA satellite data and United Nations recognition by November 2024, after 46 years of relentless effort, China had completed a 3,046-kilometer green belt around the Taklamakan Desert. It's planted over 30 million hectares of forest, an area larger than Italy, increased forest coverage in the project area from 5.05% in 1977 to 13.84% by 2020, and reduced Beijing's annual sandstorm days from 26 in the 1970s to just 3 today. This is the story of how China fought the desert and won, and why this might be one of the most important environmental success stories nobody's talking about. Let's find out together. Right now, you're relooking at the Gobi Desert and Taklamakan Desert in northern China, some of the harshest environments on Earth. The Himalayas, to the south, create a massive rain shadow, preventing rainfall from reaching this region. Annual precipitation: 100 to 250 millimeters, compared to 1,500 millimeters for mainland China. The result: over 1.6 million square kilometers of desert, and these deserts were expanding aggressively. Every year, 3,600 square kilometers of grassland was lost to the Gobi. Another 2,000 square kilometers of topsoil would blow away in dust storms, massive yellow clouds that swept across China, Korea, and sometimes reached North America. The environmental and economic costs were catastrophic. By the mid-20th century, desertification threatened nearly 200 million lives. In total, over 400 million people were affected, forced to migrate as climate refugees when their land became uninhabitable. Agriculture collapsed in affected regions. Buildings were buried under advancing sand dunes. Entire villages disappeared. In 1978, the Chinese government made a decision that would change the country's environmental trajectory forever. They announced the Three-North Shelterbelt Forest Program, a 72-year plan to plant a forest barrier across northern China's 3 northern regions: a north, the northeast, and the northwest. The project would cover 13 provinces and autonomous regions, spanning a total area of 4.069 million square kilometers, 42.4% of China's total land area. The goals were audacious: create a wall of trees extending 4,500 kilometers long and up to 1,448 kilometers wide in certain regions. Increase forest coverage from 5.05% to 14.95% by 2050. Plant approximately 88 million acres of forests, stop desert expansion, reduce sandstorms, sequester carbon, store wildlife habitats, and create millions of jobs for rural communities. International experts were skeptical. The 1950s and 1960s had seen early afforestation attempts that failed catastrophically due to inadequate planning, poor understanding of soil composition, and lack of water availability. How could this massive project succeed where previous efforts had failed? The answer was science, persistence, and adaptive management. The program was divided into three phases: 1978 to 2000, 2001 to 2020, and 2021 to 2050. Each phase learned from the previous one, adjusting strategies based on what worked and what didn't. Phase 1, 1978 to 2000, focused on planting trees and shrubs along main wind sand corridors and establishing shelter belts around farmlands and settlements. Approximately 4.07 million hectares of forests were planted during this period, but many trees died. The harsh climate, poor soil, and limited water meant survival rates were low. Scientists realized monoculture planting, using mostly poplars and willows, was creating forests vulnerable to disease and pests. In Ningxia, over 1 billion poplar trees were lost to disease. The project needed biodiversity. In 2012, the World Bank donated $80 million specifically to plant more indigenous mixes of vegetation instead of single-species monocultures. Critics like Professor Hong Jung from the University of Hawaii warned that massive tree planting in arid regions could deplete already scarce groundwater, trading one environmental problem for another. Chinese scientists acknowledged this risk and adapted strategy. Plant vegetation with lower water requirements. Use drought-resistant shrubs and grasses alongside trees. Implement efficient drip irrigation systems. And focus on sustaining vegetation health rather than just coverage numbers. Phase 2, 2001 to 2020, incorporated these lessons. The project tested hardy species like poplars adapted to dry climates. Paired them with clever water diversion techniques. Used straw checkerboards where straw is placed in a checkerboard. Pattern on desert surfaces to fix dunes and reduce wind erosion. Deployed high-pressure water jets to dig planting holes quickly through sand to reach wetter substrate layers. And protected seedlings with fences and netting to reduce wind force. The results began to show. By 2020, forest coverage in the project area had reached 13.84%, nearly triple the 1977 baseline of 5.05%. More than 30 million hectares of trees had been planted. A green belt over 3,000 kilometers long was taking shape around major deserts like the vast Taklamakan in Xinjiang, and critically, the effects were measurable beyond just tree counts. Beijing's sandstorm days dropped from 26 per year in the late 1970s to 3 per year by the 2020s. The frequency and intensity of dust storms decreased dramatically across northern China. Soil erosion rates slowed. Local microclimates improved, aiding agriculture. Rivers that had dried up began flowing again. Groundwater levels started recovering in some areas. Wildlife returned. Birds, insects, and small mammals reappeared in areas that had been lifeless sand for decades. In November 2024, China announced a milestone. The 3,046-kilometer green belt around the Taklamakan Desert was complete. The country's overall forest coverage had grown from 10% in 1949 to 25% in 2024, with the Great Green Wall contributing significantly. Desert coverage dropped from 27.2% to 26.8% between 2014 and 2024. The first time in modern history that China's deserts were shrinking rather than expanding. But perhaps most remarkably, the project became economically sustainable. Instead of depending solely on government funding, the Great Green Wall integrated economic development. Forest and fruit-related industries generated 8.04 trillion yuan in 2023, over $180 billion, and directly employed 60 million people across China. Local communities that had been climate refugees found stable livelihoods in tree planting, land maintenance, sustainable forestry, and tourism. The project lifted tens of millions of people out of poverty. Communities transitioned from harmful agricultural practices to ecology-friendly tourism, fruit businesses, and forestry. The restoration of arable land revitalized agriculture, allowing farmers to improve crop yields and diversify production. International recognition followed. In 1994, the United Nations Environment Program awarded the project its Global 500 award. NASA's Earth Observatory confirmed through satellite data between 2000 and 2017 that China contributed significantly to global greening efforts, primarily through afforestation programs. A 2019 study in Nature Sustainability found that while human activity had previously caused land degradation in China, these restoration policies led to a net increase in vegetated land. The project employed cutting-edge technology, robots capable of drilling holes, planting seedlings, watering, and compacting soil in just 5 seconds per tree were deployed in challenging terrain. Remote sensors monitored forest health in real time, helping anticipate emerging risks like disease or water stress. Drones surveyed vast areas to track progress and identify problem zones. AI and machine learning optimized planting strategies based on soil type, moisture levels, and climate data. Solar farms were integrated into desert regions, including the Gobi Desert. Massive solar panel installations, some arranged in shapes visible from space, including a record-breaking horse-shaped array-generated renewable electricity, while providing shade that reduced soil evaporation and created microclimates suitable for growing crops. But the project hasn't been without challenges and criticism. Geographer Professor Hong Zheng warns that some planted forests stress water supplies in already arid regions. Ecologist Zhang Gaoming from the Chinese Academy of Sciences has been a vocal critic, stating planting trees in arid and semi-arid land violates ecological principles and calling the forest coverage goals a fairy tale. A World Resources Institute report found that of 53,000 hectares of trees planted in Gansu's Minshan area, a quarter of seedlings died, and the rest became dwarf trees lacking capacity to protect soil. Some critics argue the government is responding to crises rather than preventing them, that large publicized events like air pollution force action, but don't properly address root causes like overdrawing groundwater or unsustainable land use. The project has also dramatically impacted traditional lifestyles. In Inner Mongolia, extensive environmental engineering has upended traditionally nomadic communities by fencing and pastures. Questions remain about long-term ecological sustainability, whether non-native tree species will thrive permanently in these harsh conditions, and how ecosystems will respond to these engineered landscapes over generations. Despite criticisms, the measurable successes are undeniable, according to Chinese authorities. 336,000 square kilometers of desert land, equivalent to the size of Finland or Vietnam, has turned green. The forest cover in the project area is now 13.57%, a remarkable increase from 5.05% 4 decades ago. These achievements show the project is steadily marching toward its 2050 goal of afforesting 35.08 million hectares and raising forest coverage to 14.95%. The emerging Green Great Wall has not only stopped further desertification from the north, but also remarkably reduced sandstorms in the affected area. Beijing's transformation from a dust-choked city to one with blue skies is visible proof of success. Here's what makes this story so important for global environmental efforts. China demonstrated that massive-scale ecosystem restoration is possible with sufficient political will, scientific planning, long-term commitment, adaptive management, and economic integration. The project offers lessons for other countries facing desertification. The Sahel region in Africa is attempting a similar Great Green Wall project, spanning 8,000 kilometers across 11 countries from Senegal to Djibouti. They're studying China's methods, both successes and failures, to inform their approach. The key lessons. Monoculture planting fails biodiversity is essential. Water management is critical. Don't plant trees that will drain. Aquifers economic sustainability matters. Projects that generate revenue for local communities persist. Technology accelerates success. Robots, drones, sensors, and AI dramatically improve efficiency. Adaptive management works. Learn from failures and adjust strategies, and long-term commitment is necessary. 72-year timelines allow ecosystems to stabilize. But perhaps the most important lesson is that environmental restoration and economic development don't have to conflict. The Great Green Wall created millions of jobs, lifted communities out of poverty, generated billions in revenue, and improved environmental conditions all simultaneously. Looking forward, China plans to expand forest coverage to 14% and enhance forest stock volumes to 260 million cubic meters by 2050. Key strategies include improving tree survival rates through better species selection, implementing adaptive planting methods based on local conditions, increasing use of indigenous plant mixes, and expanding renewable energy integration. The project has become a cornerstone of China's climate change mitigation strategy. The forests sequester massive amounts of carbon dioxide, though exact figures are debated. Estimates suggest hundreds of millions of tons annually. This contributes to China's commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Western media has largely ignored this story. While China faces deserved criticism for many environmental issues, air pollution, industrial emissions, plastic waste, this massive ecological success receives minimal international coverage, perhaps because it doesn't fit convenient narratives, perhaps because acknowledging success requires nuance. The Great Green Wall isn't perfect. It faces legitimate scientific criticisms about water use, biodiversity, and long-term sustainability. But it's also the largest successful ecological restoration project in human history, and that deserves recognition. If this story surprised you, if you had no idea, China had successfully fought back desertification at continental scale, then share it, talk about it. And remember that environmental challenges, however massive, are not insurmountable when governments commit to long-term solutions. Because when it comes to fighting climate change and environmental degradation, the truth is, humanity has the tools, knowledge, and capability to reverse damage we've caused if we have the political will and persistence to see it through. Thanks for watching, and next time, we'll explore another incredible environmental story that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Stay curious, stay wild.